Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than her peers, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall with a frame that seemed too delicate for military service. Yet beneath her quiet exterior burned a determination that had carried her through the rigorous training required to become a Navy hospital corpsman attached to a SEAL team. Her hands, though small, were steady and sure when treating wounded soldiers, earning her the respect of warriors who initially doubted whether she belonged in their brotherhood. Growing up in a small Texas town, Sarah had watched her father, a retired Marine, struggle with injuries from his service. She remembered the countless nights he spent in pain, the way his face would tighten when he thought no one was looking. Those memories drove her to pursue medicine, but not in the comfort of a civilian hospital. She wanted to be where soldiers needed help the most, in the heat of battle where every second counted between life and death. The training had been brutal. While she couldn't match the physical strength of her male counterparts, Sarah compensated with intelligence, speed, and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. Her instructors noted how she could perform complex medical procedures while simulated gunfire echoed around the training facility. Where others flinched, she focused. Where others hesitated, she acted. Now, after 18 months of deployment in Afghanistan, Sarah had earned her place among Team Bravo. The SEALs no longer saw her as the weak link they initially feared she might be. They had witnessed her crawl under enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers, watched her work miracles with basic medical supplies in conditions that would challenge a fully equipped hospital. Still, some worried about her size and whether she could handle herself if things went terribly wrong. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the team leader, had initially been skeptical about having a female medic on his squad. His concerns weren't rooted in prejudice but in the harsh realities of their missions. The enemy showed no mercy to captured Americans, and women faced additional horrors if taken prisoner. However, Sarah had proven herself time and again, saving 3 members of his team during previous operations. Her medical expertise had kept them operational when they might otherwise have been evacuated. The mission briefing that morning seemed routine by their standards. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound nestled in the mountains near the Pakistan border. The target was believed to be a key figure in planning attacks against coalition forces, and his capture could save countless lives. The plan was straightforward: infiltrate under cover of darkness, capture the target, and extract before dawn. Sarah's role, as always, would be to provide medical support if needed and remain with their extraction point. As they prepared their equipment that evening, Sergeant Mike Chen, the team's communications specialist, joked with Sarah about her ever-growing medical kit. She had developed a reputation for carrying supplies that others considered unnecessary weight, but those same supplies had saved lives when standard gear proved insufficient. Her backpack contained everything from basic bandages to emergency surgical tools, all organized with the precision of someone who knew that in combat, every second spent searching for the right supply could mean the difference between life and death. Petty Officer Tom Rodriguez, the youngest member of their team, still remembered his first mission with Sarah. He had taken shrapnel in his leg during a firefight, and while he tried to tough it out, the wound had been worse than he admitted. Sarah had noticed his limp and forced him to let her examine the injury. Her treatment had prevented what could have been a serious infection, and Tom had trusted her completely ever since. The helicopter ride to their insertion point was quiet, each team member lost in their own pre-mission rituals. Sarah checked her medical supplies one final time, running through mental scenarios of different types of injuries she might need to treat. She had learned to visualize various emergency situations, preparing her mind for the quick decisions that could save lives. The rhythmic sound of the helicopter blades provided a strange comfort, a familiar backdrop to the anxiety that always preceded dangerous operations. As they approached the target area, Sarah felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came before every mission. Despite all her training and experience, she never lost the healthy fear that kept her sharp and focused. She knew that overconfidence could be just as deadly as panic in their line of work. The terrain below looked hostile even in the darkness, a landscape of rocky hills and deep valleys that could hide any number of threats. The insertion went smoothly, with the team landing several kilometers from their target and beginning their approach on foot. Sarah moved with them through the rough terrain, her smaller size actually proving advantageous as she navigated between rocks and through narrow passages that the larger men sometimes struggled with. Her medical training had also included extensive physical conditioning, and she kept pace with her teammates despite carrying the additional weight of her medical supplies. None of them could have predicted that this routine mission would become the most challenging test of their training and brotherhood. As they moved through the darkness toward their objective, Sarah had no idea that in just a few hours, she would face a situation that would push her skills, courage, and determination to their absolute limits. The compound appeared exactly as the intelligence photos had shown, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall in a valley between two ridgelines. What the photos hadn't revealed was the carefully prepared ambush waiting for them. As Team Bravo approached their target, they had no way of knowing that their mission had been compromised, that enemy fighters had been waiting for days in positions carefully chosen to maximize the devastation they could inflict. Lieutenant Commander Morrison signaled for the team to take their positions around the perimeter. Sarah moved to the designated extraction point, a cluster of rocks about 200 meters from the main compound that would provide cover and a clear line of sight for supporting the team's withdrawal. From her position, she could see her teammates moving like shadows toward their objective, their movements precise and coordinated despite the difficult terrain. The attack came without warning. The night erupted in muzzle flashes as automatic weapons opened fire from concealed positions on both ridgelines. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly, creating a crossfire that caught the SEAL team in the open ground near the compound. The sound of gunfire echoed off the rocky walls of the valley, creating a deafening roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sarah watched in horror as her teammates dove for whatever cover they could find. The carefully planned operation had dissolved into chaos in a matter of seconds. Through her night vision scope, she could see Morrison and his team pinned down behind a low stone wall, enemy fire keeping them from advancing or retreating. The green glow of tracer rounds crisscrossed the darkness like deadly stars, and the sound of bullets striking stone sent sparks flying in all directions. Radio communications crackled with urgent reports. Morrison's voice cut through the static, calling for immediate extraction as enemy reinforcements could be heard approaching from the north. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Sarah realized that the planned helicopter pickup was impossible with enemy fighters controlling the high ground. Her teammates were trapped, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever against the overwhelming numbers they faced. Then she saw Rodriguez go down. Even from her distant position, Sarah could tell the young petty officer was badly wounded. He had been trying to move to a better position when a burst of machine gun fire caught him in the open. She watched him fall and then struggle to drag himself behind cover, leaving a dark trail on the rocky ground that she knew was blood. Chen's voice came over the radio, tight with pain and barely controlled panic. He had been hit as well, shrapnel from a grenade that exploded near his position. His communications equipment was damaged, making it difficult for the team to coordinate their movements or call for support. The situation was spiraling toward disaster, and Sarah knew that without immediate medical attention, both Rodriguez and Chen might not survive long enough for rescue. Morrison made the decision that would haunt him for years afterward. With enemy fire intensifying and no other options available, he ordered the team to fall back to Sarah's position. But the wounded men couldn't move fast enough, and the enemy fire was too intense for the others to carry them. They were facing an impossible choice: abandon their wounded teammates or risk the entire team in an attempt to save them. Sarah made her decision before Morrison finished speaking. Grabbing her medical kit and as much ammunition as she could carry, she left the safety of her position and began moving toward her trapped teammates. The distance that had seemed so short during their approach now stretched like an endless expanse of deadly ground. Every step brought her closer to the enemy fire that was already claiming American lives. The sound of bullets passing close to her head was unlike anything she had experienced in training. The supersonic crack of near misses mixed with the deeper thump of rounds striking the ground near her feet. Sarah forced herself to focus on her breathing, on the medical training that had become second nature, on anything except the terror that threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. She reached Rodriguez first, sliding into cover beside the wounded SEAL just as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the rocks where she had been standing moments before. The young man was conscious but in severe pain, blood seeping from wounds in his chest and left arm. Sarah's hands moved automatically, her training taking over as she assessed his injuries and began applying pressure bandages to control the bleeding. Working under fire required a completely different mindset than anything she had practiced. Every few seconds, she had to pause her medical treatment to return fire with her sidearm, keeping enemy fighters from advancing on their position. The coordination required was beyond anything she had imagined. Switching between saving lives and taking them in a deadly rhythm that pushed her skills to their absolute limit. Chen was 30 meters away, pinned behind a damaged section of wall with blood running down his face from shrapnel wounds. Sarah knew she had to reach him quickly, but the ground between their positions was completely exposed to enemy fire. She made another decision that defied all tactical logic but felt absolutely necessary. She would cross that deadly space and bring both wounded men back to safety. Using smoke grenades to provide concealment, Sarah began the most terrifying journey of her life. Dragging Rodriguez while laying down covering fire was a physical challenge that pushed her small frame beyond its limits. The SEAL was nearly twice her weight, and moving him across rough terrain while bullets filled the air around them required strength she didn't know she possessed. The enemy fighters had realized what she was attempting and concentrated their fire on the small figure moving between their positions. Bullets kicked up dust and stone fragments around her, and Sarah felt the heat of near misses as rounds passed within inches of her body. She continued forward, fueled by determination and the knowledge that her teammates would die without her help. Reaching Chen required crossing the most dangerous section of ground, where enemy fire from both ridgelines converged. Sarah used every piece of cover available, moving in short rushes while enemy fighters tried to anticipate her next move. When she finally reached the communications specialist, she found him worse off than she had feared. The shrapnel had caused significant blood loss, and he was drifting in and out of consciousness. Now she faced the ultimate test of her training and courage, getting both wounded men back to safety while the entire enemy force concentrated their fire on stopping her. The extract position was 200 meters away, an impossible distance that might as well have been miles. But Sarah had come too far to give up now, and she began the longest journey of her life. The journey back to safety became a desperate race against time and overwhelming enemy fire. Sarah had fashioned makeshift stretchers from equipment and debris, but moving 2 wounded men across hostile territory while under constant attack pushed every limit of human endurance. Rodriguez had lost consciousness from blood loss, while Chen drifted between awareness and shock, occasionally mumbling coordinates for air support that would never come. Morrison and the remaining team members provided covering fire from their positions, but they were running dangerously low on ammunition. Each burst from their weapons had to count, and they found themselves rationing bullets like precious water in a desert. The enemy forces, sensing victory, pressed their advantage and began advancing down the ridgelines toward the trapped Americans. Sarah's small frame worked to her advantage as she low-crawled through terrain that would have exposed larger soldiers to enemy observation. She used every depression in the ground, every boulder and outcropping, to shield herself and her patients from the devastating crossfire that continued to rake their position. Her medical training had included extensive instruction in field movement of casualties, but nothing had prepared her for doing it under such intense combat conditions. Halfway to the extraction point, disaster struck again. Chen's condition deteriorated rapidly, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. Sarah realized he was going into shock from blood loss and would die without immediate intervention. She made the agonizing decision to stop in the middle of the firefight and perform emergency medical procedures that required her full attention. Working by feel in the darkness, with enemy rounds impacting the ground around her, Sarah established an intravenous line to replace Chen's lost fluids. Her hands remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, muscle memory from countless hours of training guiding her movements. She had practiced these procedures blindfolded, never imagining she would need that skill while machine gun fire echoed overhead. The treatment stabilized Chen enough to continue moving, but the delay had allowed enemy fighters to get closer to their position. Sarah could hear voices in the darkness, speaking in urgent tones as they coordinated their advance. She knew that in minutes, the enemy would be close enough to overwhelm their small group with sheer numbers. Rodriguez regained consciousness as Sarah resumed dragging him toward safety, his eyes wide with pain and confusion. He tried to speak, to tell her to leave him and save herself, but Sarah silenced him with a look that communicated her absolute determination to get him home alive. She had not come this far to abandon anyone, regardless of the personal cost. The final 100 meters proved to be the most challenging. Enemy fire intensified as their opponents realized the Americans were attempting to escape, and Sarah found herself pinned down with her patients in a shallow depression that provided minimal protection. Bullets struck the ground so close that dirt and stone fragments peppered her equipment and clothing. It was then that Morrison made a decision that would define his career and haunt his conscience. Against all tactical doctrine, he left his covered position and advanced toward Sarah's location, drawing enemy fire away from the medic and her patients. His sacrifice allowed Sarah to complete the final stage of her desperate journey. But it came at a terrible price. Morrison took multiple hits as he moved across the open ground, his body armor stopping some rounds but not all. Sarah watched her team leader fall just as she reached the extraction point, adding a third casualty to her already overwhelming responsibilities. The team's situation had gone from desperate to impossible, and Sarah faced the reality that she might not be able to save everyone. But Sarah's determination only grew stronger in the face of mounting challenges. She established a defensive position using the natural rock formation and began treating Morrison's wounds while maintaining security for her other patients. Her medical supplies were running low, forcing her to improvise with materials from their equipment and even pieces of their uniforms. The sound of approaching helicopter rotors finally cut through the gunfire, but Sarah knew that landing in their current position was impossible with enemy forces so close. She made one final, desperate decision that would either save her team or result in their complete destruction. Using the team's remaining smoke grenades and flares, she created a signal that would guide the rescue helicopter to their exact location, while simultaneously revealing their position to every enemy fighter in the area. The next few minutes became a maelstrom of noise, light, and violence as the rescue helicopter arrived under heavy fire. The aircrew showed incredible courage, hovering just long enough for Sarah to load her 3 wounded teammates aboard, while enemy bullets struck the aircraft's armor. Sarah herself was the last to board, providing covering fire until the final moment before the helicopter lifted off into the relative safety of the dark sky. During the flight to the medical facility, Sarah continued treating her patients despite her own exhaustion and the wounds she had sustained during the firefight. Adrenaline had masked the pain from shrapnel cuts and bruises, but her focus remained entirely on keeping Morrison, Chen, and Rodriguez alive until they reached advanced medical care. All 3 men survived their wounds, though Rodriguez required multiple surgeries to repair damage to his chest and arm. Chen recovered fully from his injuries but bore scars that would remind him daily of Sarah's courage under fire. Morrison spent months in rehabilitation, his wounds ending his career as a team leader but not his respect for the medic who had saved his life. The official after-action reports documented Sarah's actions in clinical language that failed to capture the true heroism of her decisions that night. Military bureaucracy struggled to adequately recognize actions that so clearly exceeded the normal expectations of duty and courage. However, those who witnessed her performance that night knew they had seen something extraordinary. Word of Sarah's actions spread throughout the special operations community, earning her recognition from soldiers who understood the true meaning of courage under fire. She became a symbol of the dedication and skill that defined the best military medical personnel, proof that heroism came in many forms, and that the desire to save lives could be just as powerful as any weapon. Years later, when Rodriguez married his longtime girlfriend, Sarah stood beside him as a bridesmaid, their bond forged in combat, unbreakable despite the passage of time. Chen named his first daughter after the medic who had saved his life, ensuring that future generations would know the story of courage that allowed him to become a father. Sarah eventually left active duty but continued serving as a civilian trauma surgeon, her military experience providing skills that saved countless lives in hospital emergency rooms. She rarely spoke about that night in Afghanistan, but her teammates never forgot the small woman who had risked everything to bring them home alive. The title of hero never sat comfortably with Sarah, who considered her actions simply part of the job she had trained to do. But for 3 families who still had their loved ones, and for a special operations community that had witnessed the very best of military service, Sarah Martinez had proven that the measure of a warrior was not found in size or strength, but in the willingness to sacrifice everything for those who serve beside you.